Right now. There you are. John, over to you. Welcome, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Mindy, and welcome viewers to our Democratic Candidate Forum in anticipation of Montana's first congressional district primary. This afternoon's event is sponsored by the Sanders County Democrats. As Mindy mentioned, I'm John Thorson, and I am the vice chair for the county. First, a thumbs up, if you would please join me in thanking our Sanders County Chair, Mindy Farrell, for her work during 2021 and 2022 in particular, for this forum this afternoon with all three Democratic candidates. And what a young, experienced, and accomplished trio of congressional candidates we have. Monica Trinnell, Tom Winter, and Cora Newman. They have all stepped up to accept the ongoing challenge faced by the Democratic Party in bringing social justice and equity and civil rights and good economies to our state and country. What is especially exciting this afternoon is that one of these three will be our next Western District Member of Congress, our first Democratic representative since Pat Williams left in 1997, 25 years ago. We are eager for the views and enthusiasm of this trio. Each candidate will have 20 minutes and will respond to 6 questions that have been provided to the candidates. We're asking that they take no more than 3 minutes for each question. If there are time left over at the end of the question, we'll let them make a closing statement, or we can take a few questions from the viewers. So at that point, I think Monica is on the session, and welcome Monica Trinnell to our candidate forum this afternoon. And I'd like to provide a little biographic information on Monica. Most of you know her. She's been in our county many, many times. She's a Missoula attorney and an American rower. She was born in Bighorn, Wyoming, but was raised in eastern Montana on a ranch with her 9 siblings. Monica received a Bachelor of Arts from Gonzaga University, where she started rowing, and she concluded her education with a Juris Doctor degree from Rutgers in New Jersey. Monica's career has focused on public utility law, energy law, property rights, and litigation. She has her firm in Missoula, where she concentrates on those issues. She has appeared numerous times before the Public Service Commission and served as a member of the Montana Consumer Council, practicing often before that commission. And as you know, she ran a spirited race for the PSC in 2020. So Monica, again, welcome this afternoon. And if you don't mind, we'll start with the first question here. And the question is this: what will you do in Congress to sustain quality and affordable health care in the Western District's rural communities?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say I'm actually in a parking lot in Rock on my way on the campaign trail. So, and I also just want to say a shout out to the incredible celebration yesterday up at the CSKT and the restoration of the bison range to the tribes. I was up there and it was really an incredible day. So I know that's close to you and near and dear to some of your hearts. So I just wanted to let you know that that was really an amazing day yesterday. So jumping into the rural healthcare and what Congress can do to, support our communities. I think there are a number of different things right now. So prescription drug prices, making sure that Medicare can negotiate prescription drugs, I think is a really big deal in making sure that prescription drug costs are coming down. Other things I went out to Superior and visited the hospital there, and they're doing an amazing job. The 2 women who have stepped up and just are running that hospital, it was a fantastic story, and it was great to be out there and seeing, just people in the community stepping up and seeing the needs of the community and serving it. So I think seeing the critical access hospitals, the needs that they've had through COVID, and making sure that they're operating in the black is a really, looking at the models that have worked. And I think healthcare is a really important piece of this. So passing or making the Mental Health Parity Act of 2015 was passed, but it needs to be enforced. And I think that's really on Congress to step in and make sure that mental health is getting the attention that it deserves, especially in our rural areas. I think, abortion access and women's reproductive rights is going to be really, really key as we, see where we go with this new leaked decision, and making sure that women have access to healthcare providers across the state. Telehealth is a good fill-in option, but it's not always, the frontline option, and it shouldn't be the sustained option through time. So it also requires broadband access, which not all of our rural areas have. I think that there are a lot of things that we need to be looking at, making sure we have providers in rural areas. One thing that I would like to see happen in Lewistown, there's a really good example of a local woman who was raised there, went to medical school and came back, and is working in the community as a physician. And she's now training another person who's coming in and would come up underneath her. And so I think that having people be able to provide services in their communities where they grew up, where they can return to, and maybe looking at targeted student loan relief or things like that to make that possible and happen, so that we do have quality, affordable, accessible healthcare in our rural communities. I think that's really, really important.
Okay, thank you, Monica. And we move on to question 2. Prolonged Ukrainian war is likely to increase threats to national security, contribute to economic problems such as inflation, draw down our military supplies, and aggravate global warming. How do we balance these implications with the need to aid the democratically elected government in Ukraine?
So I think that it's a both and problem. I don't think we can look at democracy or climate change or democracy and any of these other questions as binary choices. I think we have to be able to solve them all. And I think that, we can do that by prioritizing having a strong functional economy and a strong middle class. So some of the things that I know have been talked about, and this is really a hot button issue, is energy security. But we need to have an honest conversation about what that means and what carbon emissions do. So having, some people think the war in Ukraine was really a war about fossil fuel. And I think making sure that we have strong, independent, resilient energy supplies at home. Western Montana is a really, really unique situation where we could potentially explore what it would look like to have true energy autonomy and resiliency at home. I mean, 97% of our energy needs are met through hydro, so renewable local energy resources. And in Lincoln, Sanders, and I think Flathead County too, natural gas isn't used as a form of heat just because it isn't piped through there. So there's almost a sort of a natural starting point, and especially Northwest Montana, that we could use to create a way to say, let's look at what it would look like to have true energy independence at home and move in that direction with local supply. So we need to work on transmission, modernizing the transmission grid. We need to look at, getting off of fossil fuel. So, ending subsidies for fossil fuel and charging full freight for any leases on federal lands. I think those are all important things. But I think that the support for democracy in Ukraine is it's necessary, and I think that should be non-negotiable. We should be standing behind and with Ukraine, absolutely. And then I think we also need to be looking at how to really move towards energy independence and sustainability, not just for America, but for every country. And so that we're not forced into these, deals with the devil. Like we shouldn't have to turn from, okay, well, we're not going to have oil from Russia, so we'll turn to, MSB and who butchered Jamal Khashoggi, right? Like those are not good options. And we need to have a long-term, long view conversation about energy independence.
Okay, thank you. May I stop you there and move on to question 3. For the Western District, what are the major takeaways from the 2020 census, and how will these findings inform your work as a member of Congress?
As I've traveled this district, so it's 16 counties, Glacier, part of Ponderay, and then wrapping down and grabbing Gallatin. The biggest takeaway, I think, from both the 2020 census and the time period since the 2020 census, which has seen incredible growth. So there's this additional piece of growth that the 2020 census didn't capture, but that's real and we're experiencing on the ground, I think there's the rural urban issues in this district, which are different and they're real. And then the housing issue, which is very fundamental to what we're seeing. So I want to talk about the housing in terms of both like actual supply and how we're going to get people in homes, but also the infrastructure that goes along with that. So the sewer system in Plains and Paradise and Seeley Lake, and Bozeman is now going on a water restriction because they're going to want to run out of water. So the infrastructure that supports our communities is something that we have to be talking about, how we're going to provide the supply. So we can say, well, we need more houses, but we need to talk about what that's going to look like. And they're currently pending in Congress a number of bills to address the housing supply question and how we'll roll that out and deploy those resources in Western Montana is, I think, probably one of the biggest pieces of the just really, really fast growth that we've experienced in the last 2 years following the 2020 census that gave us this seat. But I will say that getting to this place where housing is a crisis has happened over decades of policies that are now coming to a head. And so revisiting those policies and trying to figure out an answer to them, I think we have to be careful about jumping at shadows and throwing band-aids over things when the fundamental problem may take longer to fix. So we have to find immediate ways to solve the situation and to take the pressure off of it. And I also just want to say quickly, in Bozeman, the growth is people who are over 60. So what's happening in Bozeman right now is between 30 and 60, there's actually a population decline. They were going to build a 9th elementary, and not only are they not going to build that 9th elementary, they're looking at consolidating their 8th elementary. So we're moving our families. There's an out-migration from the cities, not just to surrounding areas like Belgrade or Frenchtown and Missoula, but they're leaving the state completely. Somebody in the planning person in Bozeman told me that 3 people with young families were leaving Montana entirely. So we need to figure out how to keep our families here. How do we keep a teacher who makes a starting salary of $26,500 in Thompson Falls? How do we keep those people in our communities? And, we have to look at low income housing tax credits, student loan forgiveness in a very targeted way that actually allows our families to stay here. Lots and lots of different things that we can do there. But those are some of the takeaways I see.
Now, let me stop you there, but the next question is somewhat related. What are the major economic problems facing the Western District, and what can you, one out of 435 House members, do to address those issues? Kind of what can a congressperson do?
And so the income inequality is really one of the huge issues. I mean, we talk about inflation in terms of, like, I just filled up my minivan, it was $66. And so, I know I've talked to people in Dillon who are saying, look, I'm just putting $5 in the tank so I can get to my job. And I think figuring out there are lots and lots of jobs available, but if you're talking about a job cleaning a house in Seeley Lake for 5 hours a week, and even if they're paying $20 an hour, that you're not going to be able to put things together like that. So I think figuring out how we can use both the opportunity of the housing issue with the need for really good paying jobs to strengthen our unions so that we're actually getting people into, jobs that are they're long term, that they can plan, that people can move here, paying our teachers more. I mean, I think we need to address what's happening now with the war on education. We need to fund our public schools and make sure that they're a core, strong institution within our communities. So I think those are all things that we can do. What I will do as one of 435 members in Congress is serve this district. This is my home. It's my only home. I don't have another one. And I think one of the major things that people think, people think about, oh, we have a congressional seat, like what legislation is going to get passed. But I think we need to think about it in terms of constituent services. So holding hearings, having conversations, showing up, and being a presence and a leader in the community. I went to Sealy Swan. They had a community council meeting. They invited all 9 of the congressional candidates from both sides. I was the only one who showed up. And they had this really long conversation about garbage, which is a huge issue in that valley. Like, how are they going to get the garbage? And someone didn't want a transfer station, but they need to, there's a problem with grizzly bears. And so I think showing up, having hearings, having conversations about how are we going to deploy resources to the areas of need. There are resources available, and there's funding available to have sewers and Plains and in Paradise. So why not have some hearings and figure out what is the solution? Because I think in the end, people actually do want solutions and they want to move forward. So I think being a voice and showing up and trying to bring our communities together is a service that I can provide.
Great, thank you. And again, this is sort of a related question as well. If the Democratic Party loses control of the US House, very unlikely, of course, what issues would you focus on? And what are your strategies to achieving a successful 2-year term?
So I will just remind everyone that Jeanette Rankin was elected in 1916 and 1917. She was a freshman member of the House in the minority party, and they asked her to chair the hearings on the legislation that became the 19th Amendment, which gave half of us the right to vote. And so never underestimate the power of a freshman congresswoman from Montana, and never underestimate the power of showing up, because I think it really is about showing up and participating and being prepared. And so the issues that I would focus on mostly are trying to bring our community together to get things done. So right now, one very concrete thing that could be done is to normalize electric vehicles and EV charging stations. So there are resources available that's already been put into the pipeline. And how can we pull those resources down into the communities in Montana? So that's one example. Another example is the funding that's available. That I think it was $250 million that was available for housing. And there's just a lot of red tape in terms of actually getting those resources deployed. The child tax credit is a good example of that. They were trying to deploy this, this money, and then they realized that people who need it actually don't file tax returns. So, and I give the example of the SNAP benefits program. That application is 17 pages long. So the Farm Bill is going to come up in 2023. So one of the things that I can do for our community is, give resources and a place for people to say, okay, here are resources that are available. There are so many different entities across this district doing amazing work to serve the needs of our community. And I think this new congressional seat gives us an opportunity to have a central place where, there can be this, where is the information? How do I know? I need SNAP benefits come from the Farm Bill, but in Kalispell, they give 1,000 kids food backpacks every weekend. And so centralizing that information, trying to figure out, where are the gaps in coverage and how can we really address that? That can be addressed no matter what, whether you're a minority, majority, whatever. Those needs within our communities can be addressed by a member of Congress, and I will do that.
Thank you. A final question here. Naturally, we as Democrats want you to represent democratic values in Congress, but the extreme polarization has curtailed getting much done. How can listening to your varied constituents and the voices in Congress happen while staying true to your democratic core?
Again, I think that this is a both and question. I think listening to my constituents does stay true. That does hew to my democratic principles and my democratic core. So last night I was at a dinner in Missoula and a woman came up to me at the end of the night and she said, I just want to tell you, I am a lifelong Republican and I'm voting for you because you have grit. It was just hilarious. And I mean, I've had that conversation a lot on this journey with people who are saying, you know, I just want people to try to get along. I actually was doing some work for a ranch client last week, or what day is it today? Or this week anyway. Sorry. And they're in an area where there's only one person on the ballot for all of these races up and down the ballot. There's only one option. And, you know, these are pretty conservative people, but they said that's not right. Like some of these people aren't doing the right thing for our communities. We don't like them and we don't want to vote for them, but we don't have a choice. And so I think it's really necessary that we have these conversations and that we also understand that there is a lot of nuance. And it's the exhausted majority. It's the people in the middle who are really feeling left out and feeling like, you know, I want to live in my community and understand I might not agree with my neighbor, but I'll still shovel their walk. So I'm the sixth of 10 kids. I rode in the middle of our Olympic 8. And I know the value and the power of the middle. I've lived it. And this is what, you know, I bring to this is it's who I am. And I want this for my home more than anything else. That we say, I think real freedom is being able to live next to each other, to disagree with each other, and to still show up and go to the basketball game. And so many of you do all of that. And I love the example that the Sanders County Democrats gives to the rest of us, which is why I keep showing up to all of you, because you inspire.
Monica, you have about a minute left. Do you want to make some concluding remarks and talk about a topic that you haven't touched?
I just feel incredibly fortunate to, you know, be from Montana and I want to serve Montana. I think this congressional seat gives us hope at a time when there is real anxiety in the world. I mean, where are we going to go with our democracy and what's going to happen with our planet? And there is a lot of anxiety, but I think leadership matters. And I think having this seat gives us an opportunity to feel that our Montana voice will be heard. I mean, this seat it lies between Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park. So it's the most incredible area of the world. We can just all say that, right? It's an incredible opportunity. And seeing what happened yesterday with the CSKT taking over the bison range was so uplifting and so powerful. And I do think that we are at a time when we need to set aside some of the, you know, the just labeling and what's happened in the last 2 years. And, you know, it's been a really, really challenging time, but we can come together and you've done that in Sanders County in ways that I think are really amazing. And so thank you for your work. Thank you for showing up. And I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. And I mean, if you look at the history of Montana, our story is one of responding to times of challenges by the people. And that thread of the people showing up and voting for somebody and taking leadership roles. We see that in Burton Wheeler, Thomas Walsh, Jeanette Rankin, Mike Mansfield, Lee Metcalf, on and on and on, you know. And I think, you know, we're at a time when we need to have that happen. And I'm here because this is my home. And I feel like, you know, I have an obligation to use my skills and resources to serve my home. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you for
And
being
unfortunately,
here.
we're out of time. And thank you for the many visits you've made to our county and your interest here this afternoon. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much. Onward. Literally.
Okay, Mindy, would you please admit Tom Winter to our session this afternoon?
It looks like I might be admitted.
You
You
are
are, Tom.
admitted. Hey, isn't that special? Thank you so much for being here, Tom.
Hey, thank you. I have to tell everybody first, I apologize. We are, our entire thing is ground game. So we've been going door to door all day. And then yesterday we were at the Bison Range, and before that going to door in Bozeman. So I'm in the back of my truck in a parking lot in Ferndale. And it was on purpose. And I don't want, please don't be offended. I believe this is so important to get in front of you all, but it's also extremely important to be in front of voters. So this is the way I would be in Congress, honestly. So important to see that. As long as you can hear me and everything's good.
Never offended to seeing some beautiful pine trees behind you there, Tom. Thank you.
Any excuse to not be in my kitchen, which like gets to be 90 degrees with the sun, and I use as my office, is always a positive as well. So
very briefly, we have 6 questions for you, a total of 20 minutes and about 3 minutes per question. So let me just briefly introduce you, Tom. I think most people on the call know about you, but if there's someone who doesn't, Tom grew up in the Kansas City area, moved to Missoula in his early 20s to attend the University of Montana. He's worked for World Cell, a company that arranges and installs high-speed internet services in underserved communities. In 2018, Tom ran for the state house, and he beat the Republican incumbent by 39 votes, I understand, in House District 96, which includes much of West Missoula and Frenchtown. During the 2-year period he served in the legislature, he was on the House Human Services Committee, the House Administration Committee, the State Administration Committee. As a freshman, he introduced 24 bills, which I guess is a record. Many focused on housing and tax policy. And as you all recall, he ran for the congressional seat in 2020, but lost to Kathleen Williams in the primary. But back this year, running for the first district. And Tom, we're very pleased to have you here this afternoon. So let me start with the first question. Again, 3 minutes if you could. What will you do in Congress to sustain quality and affordable health care in Western Montana rural communities?
So I appreciate the question and thank you for the introduction. From the beginning, our campaign has been all in for healthcare for all, for single payer healthcare. And I will get to the specifics of your question, but it answers that as well. Our for-profit healthcare system, it collapsed during the pandemic and 1 million Americans died and are dying still. And healthcare workers, especially nurses and CNAs, the people at the lower end of the totem pole in the healthcare system, were treated like garbage. And so many of those people are community pillars where we are. And so many of our small towns rely on functioning small rural hospitals. And I believe that the way to stop rationing healthcare for poor families and to make it so that we don't have some of the worst outcomes for anyone who gets sick in the developed world is to move as quickly as we can to universal healthcare. Because right now, the reason that Montana has such low and poor outcomes, especially around mental health with suicide, with native suicide, native health itself, and just in rural communities across the state, is because our system and a for-profit system will naturally ration healthcare for communities that do not have as much money as other communities. And we will never be as rich as New York City or Los Angeles. So we will always have our healthcare rationed. Now, having said that, how do you get there from the beginning? I really believe that, especially for the counties we're talking about where you are, those are rural hospitals. And there are ways, and there has been a bill which did not pass, which I certainly would work on with Republicans and Democrats in Congress to increase the multiple of cash, of federal money that goes to rural hospitals. What we need to do is to create a second or third tier of what constitutes a frontier hospital or frontier care setting, which would lead to a higher multiple of federal money going to those communities. It's not simply because I want there to be more money going to Libby or to Thompson Falls or to Superior, which I do, but it's also because I believe, and it's well shown, that money invested in rural hospitals especially redounds in the community, not just with better health outcomes. It doesn't just mean that you'll be able to keep the ability to have a baby in your town or get a psychiatrist, but it also means that you'll be able to put money that stays in that community. And that's a good use of federal dollars. So getting there, we do that at the beginning by working as fast as we can for single payer healthcare. And part of that is unfolding into that an immediate change in the way that we constitute rural and frontier hospitals, so that more federal money is put specifically to those in that Montana context, which outside of Montana and Idaho and honestly North Dakota and Alaska, there is no other type of place, the special type of rural hospital we have, and that to be reflected in federal legislation.
Thank you. Very different topic. A prolonged Ukrainian war will likely increase threats to national security, contribute to economic problems such as inflation, drawdown of our military supplies, and aggravate global warming. How do we balance these implications with the need to aid democratically elected government of Ukraine?
You know, I find myself thinking about especially foreign policy with humility first off. And I originally, when asked these questions, I often said, well, you know, we work in consultation with national organizations that look for ways to balance and I think also further the interests of rural, working class, and struggling American communities with the interests of democracy, of furthering democracy in the international stage. And I believe that those things can be done together. And Congress does have the responsibility, which they often don't actually use, to declare war. And I would take that incredibly seriously in this case. Now, when it comes to Ukraine and when it comes to the $40 billion, I think let's use that. The $40 billion that was recently passed bipartisanly by Congress and put forward by the Biden administration, it's incredibly difficult to get $40 billion passed for maternal health. And I'm aware of that. It's incredibly difficult for the Congress to care about getting baby formula to people. They'll vote against it, honestly. Matt Rosendale did. They will not respond to national and domestic crises, but they respond to international crises well. How do we, knowing that that's the case, how do we harness that to make sure that that money and that value and also our American ideals and values of defending democracy against Putin, against someone who's a dictator, who's committing a genocide, how do we do that? And I believe that there's a way to do that, especially in the procurement side. You know, a lot of times the way that we put funding together for military ventures is, you know, to parcel it out amongst the various strategically political reasons located military institutions. We need to have requirements within the money we spend on foreign wars, defending people who deserve defense. But we need to have requirements that money, if it's spent in America to create arms or to create, to create blankets, to create humanitarian aid, it needs to be doled out also to rural areas. Because what we're doing now is we're spending $40 billion, which we should be doing. I think it's America's moral place in the world to be defending helpless people against autocrats. And I believe it also provides a rallying case for democracy in the United States. But having said that, our procurement process now simply puts money into communities that already have it. We need to be making sure that the money that we're spending on these wars and on assisting other people, if it's spent in America, is peppered across the United States, especially in rural areas, in a way that brings prosperity to us as well. And and tell me about the 3-minute thing here, but we wrote a national level op-ed on this, and energy independence is absolutely critical for the independence of the United States democracy.
Okay, and that is 3 minutes.
Every time we gas up our cars, we put money to the gas. Okay, gotcha.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem.
3 minutes to solve Ukraine is really tough.
So back to sort of the domestic issues in Western Montana. For the Western District, what are the major takeaways from the 2020 U.S. Census, and how will those findings inform your work as a member of Congress?
That we're growing faster than we know what to do and how to respond, and that we are, this is, white settlers coming to Montana has been a thing that's been going on for 140 years, and this is simply a further extension of that. And it has led to many, many good things and many, many bad things. And we are at an inflection point in the growth of our state and our communities and the society we've built over generations. And it requires a response, I think, at every community level. And it also from the campaigns that we're running like ours, and also in the federal space. So if we look at it from the perspective first of our campaign, We want to ensure that the growth that's happening in Montana is shared equitably. And we want to make sure that it's not just going to existing stakeholders who already have a lot of money. And we want to make sure that the people who are coming here, because anyone can come here, we can't stop them. But when they come here, we want to make sure that they understand the values of this place, that they didn't just move here in order to live out some fantasy with big belt buckles and shoot them up at the OK Corral. That is not our lives here in Western Montana. That might be the one that they show on HBO and in Yellowstone and all those shows. We need to show in our politics that the deep-seated progressivism of this place is a part of it that can't be erased. And that constitution we have that guarantees right to privacy, which is right to an abortion, that ensures that we don't have at-will employment, so you're protected, that we have environmental protections. We talk openly about how those are the Montana values that you are coming here and you need to be a part of. You can be a part of this story too. But you have to understand and acknowledge that you're coming to a place that's not a blank slate, that a lot of people have put a lot of effort over lifetimes to be a part of it. Now, in the federal sense, housing policy is where we do it. And what we need to do is go after communities that are becoming, in some cases, much like gated communities. Whitefish, for instance, oftentimes is lauded for its ability to bring wealthy people, but also it's becoming a place that is run by millionaires and billionaires from out of state and meant to keep out working class people. So what we need to do is make sure that, especially on zoning, on single family zoning, we put federal money as a carrot to get Montana municipalities to allow working class housing in their precincts to deal with this influx of new people.
Number 4, Tom, is somewhat related. What are the major economic problems facing Western Montana, and what can you, as one out of 435 House members, do to address those issues?
It's just, I can't say it enough. It's about the incredible inequity in our economic system. Everything that our campaign is doing is trying to avoid that, to end that. For the last 40 years, we've seen the biggest growth in the top 1% of earners versus the bottom 99%. We were always forecasting 20 years ago that we would be in a new Gilded Age, and we are in one. So when our campaign talks about healthcare for all, that's because that would redistribute really, really rich people's money to poor communities like the ones we all live in Montana. When we talk about changing the tax code so that the rich pay their fair share, so that I don't pay 20% and Jeff Bezos pays 3.4%, that is about fixing this issue. When we talk about housing policy, it's the same thing. The government, well, let's talk about Ryan Zinke. The guy went from $2 million to $32 million in his bank account while he was in public service. Corruption is woven into the system when billionaires and millionaires have a bigger say than you and I. And that is inequality. And we can fix that by being a leading rural voice on ending inequality as much as we can in our federal system and in our tax code. And I think that one thing that Montana can offer in this case is that we can be a rural progressive light and also work hand in hand with people that honestly wouldn't normally think we would be doing so. From Republicans who represent districts in the suburbs of Maryland that think they're getting hosed on taxes on their homes, to urban communities that know that they're not getting the services that they pay for. We can provide links and a rural imprimatur so that they can work on a national level scale to get rid of this inequality. And I should say that starts with the tax system. And I worked on that in the legislature. Inequality was the thing I worked on at every turn. And we wrote numerous bills that have been copied in other states. Like, I didn't get some of my bills through in the Montana legislature, but over in California, which is wild, they're trying to pass some of my bills. Over here in other parts of the Midwest, they're taking what we did in Montana, and I worked with my constituents, and they're looking at what we did to end inequality in the Montana context and do it in their communities. And I think it shows that we can lead on these issues and lead on inequality to fix it.
Thank you. Somewhat related question.
Yeah.
If the Democratic Party loses control of the U.S. House, which is unlikely, of course, what issues would you focus on, and what strategies would you use to achieve a successful 2-year term? And I guess we're interested in the process. How do you work effectively under those circumstances?
One of the ways, and I hesitate to differ with the questioner, and I am a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and I work to get Democrats elected, other than myself as well. No party who holds the presidency has not lost the House in the post-war era. we are going to lose the House, I believe. And I need to be open with you about that and I need to be open with my future constituents about that and the challenges we will face. I believe we can win this new district for various reasons, including what our campaign specifically is fighting for, which is different from the other campaigns. But I just want to go into that with, we need to be honest with people in the first place. And I need to be honest with the people we'll be working with. Now,
Tom, we may have lost your audio.
are you there? Hello?
Try again. I
Are you there?
can hear you now.
You're just tired of hearing me. I get it. Here, let me put my phone above my head here. Just tell me if you can't hear me. So
Okay.
I would say that, one, I have shown alone amongst the candidates in the primary, I have won a district that voted for Trump plus 11 points and was held by a powerful Republican. And I have been in our state house, in the minority, and was able to bring about far-reaching legislation and pass 4 bills. Most people don't do that in their time in session at all. And I was able to work with Republicans and sometimes completely odious people, honestly, people who did not have the best interests of their constituents or mine at heart. But we were able to work together and I was able to manipulate them to do the right thing on behalf of my constituents. And so I will be serving in the minority and I will be doing what I can to work across the aisle if I must, but I will work with anybody on the values that I know are shared by everybody. And that includes single payer healthcare, changing our tax code. Remember, those things poll nationally and in Montana, both above 60% approval rates. I will go directly to the people if I must and say, what do you want? What do you think what is popular with you? And I will fight with whoever, I will fight hand in hand to get that done with whoever also believes in those issues.
Great. Thank you. Final question here. Naturally, we as Democrats want you to represent democratic values in Congress, but the extreme polarization has curtailed getting much done. How can listening to your varied constituents and the voices in Congress happen while staying true to your democratic core?
I really appreciate this question. So there's a biker gang on the road next to me. So just 1 second, if you cannot hear me, it's literally driving by. Okay, so I lost my train of thought because the Hells Angels just roared by. So what I'm looking at, so the question would be, how do we do this and listen to varied constituents and stay true to our democratic core? So look in the case now, Democrats support this, but when I went door to door for the legislative race that I ended up winning, there was I was so amazed, like every third or second door told me they wanted to legalize marijuana. And that was mostly Republicans and then some Democrats as well. It was not it wasn't what I believed to be an absolutely urgent issue. However, I support it. But I promised my constituents that I would bring whatever bill they thought they needed, that was within my moral worldview as well, to the House. We were able to write a bill to legalize marijuana with, Montana community standards put in, which portions of which were then put to the ballot, and now voters have decided in their wisdom to legalize marijuana. But part of the reason that there is criminal justice reform elements within that is because I knew as a Democrat that marijuana law was explicitly written on the House floor in the 1920s against Mexican and Native American Montanans. And it was meant specifically to demonize and also to incarcerate them. Now, before legalization, if you were Native, you had a 2 times chance of being more than a white person being put in jail if you were found with weed in your car. If you're a Black Montanan, it was a 10 times chance. So what we did is put legislation in there to legalize weed, but also to ensure that criminal justice reform occurred to make sure that what they had done to these communities in the past and used the law to go after specifically and criminalize these people and our fellow neighbors, that they got out of prison, had their records expunged, etc. Now, I think that shows the way that we can do this as Democrats and still maintain our core values. But again, I don't think we need to go against our core values as Democrats. Running as a Democrat is okay here because 71% of the country believes in Medicare for all. That's a democratic and progressive value. More than 50% of the country and more than 50% of Montanans believe we need the concerted climate action now. More than 50% of the country believes we should have abortion. We don't have to compromise. The people are with us. It is the Republican Party and some Democrats that are not with the people. And so I will fight for the people and what they want and what they think they deserve as Americans and as Montanans. And that's the promise we make every day when I'm going door to door, just before this and after this.
All right, Tom, thank you. We have about 3 more minutes. Would you like to add anything or take a question from our viewers? What's your preference?
I want to, yeah, can we get a question? And can I just have like 60 seconds to do a little closing?
Sure.
That's okay.
Anyone want a question or raise a question?
I'll throw out a question. What two committees would you prioritize in the House?
I want to be on business and labor. So the way that I think we can, like, that's what I'm really focusing on. How best and fastest can we put money in the pockets of working Montanans? That's by reforming the NLRB and ensuring that actually the values that we have here in Montana around workers' rights are national. And so I think we're seeing a lot of work in the Biden administration, which is really impressive and kind of going on behind the scenes. By the way, I'm a union member myself in IBEW 206, and we work with unions specifically as a way with Democrats and progressives to get things done and also get votes. But I think that that's the space where we can make the most immediate change in people's lives. For instance, if we could work on reinstating the Joy-Silk doctrine, which didn't have mandatory meetings to kill unions. It's how, like, Amazon, what they'll say is we're going to unionize, and then Amazon will force you, or you'll get fired, to listen to 3 hours of their anti-union screeds. We can change the law or change the rules in order to make that not happen. And that would lead to near immediate increases in people's paychecks. And that's where I think we can make the quickest change for people and put money in the pockets of Montanans and really kind of start to chip away at the inequality that we've seen.
Tom, about 30 seconds if you want to add anything else.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. Our campaign, so I'm in a truck for a reason. It's because we are going door to door. Our campaign from the beginning has been about asking you as Democrats and as Montanans and as community members, what do you think you deserve? Do you think you deserve to have dentures if you can't afford them in your old age? Do you think you deserve roads and bridges that work? Do you think if you're a Native woman, do you think you should earn as much as I, a white man, make on an hourly basis? Do you think you deserve an abortion should you need or want one? The answer is yes, every time. And those are Montana values that were written into our Constitution, that are written into the fabric of our communities: equality and equity and respect for one another, and also keeping an overarching government out of our personal lives. Our campaign is based on this idea of giving you what you deserve and what you ask for, and not being a Democrat who's in the business of saying, no, we can only do prescription drug prices, or, it's just not possible to get these things done. We're not going to fight for it. We fight for it because you're worth it and your community is worth it. And the community you've built with your family is worth my effort to get this done on your behalf.
Tom, thank you so much. We appreciate your being available for this session this afternoon and responding to our needs and concerns in Sanders County, Mineral County, Lincoln County. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Canvas.
I did this thing sitting on a bag of chicken feed. So thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so
Cora, are
Cora,
you
thank
on?
you. Yeah, Cora is on.
All right.
I'm here.
Good afternoon, Cora.
Thank you,
Welcome to our-
Cora.
Welcome to our Sanders County, Mineral County, and Lincoln County candidate forum this afternoon. I think, as you're aware, the format is 6 questions over 20 minutes, and you have received the questions in about 3 minutes per question. And I'll start by just a brief introduction of you. Cora was raised and now lives in Bozeman, Montana. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico, a master's degree from the Columbia University School of Public Health, and a doctorate from the University of Oxford. Her career experience includes founding We Are Montana and working as a nonprofit executive. Cora has spent much of the last 2 decades working in international health, economic development, and public lands advocacy. She launched her campaign, as you recall, in 2019 for the US Senate, but dropped out when Governor Bullock entered the race. Cora, we're very pleased that you could be with us this afternoon. And I will start by the first question here. Cora, what would you do in Congress to sustain quality and affordable health care in the Western District's rural communities?
Thank you for that question. And can you hear me okay? I'm not sure if I should be using my Bluetooth or not. Let me just turn it off so it doesn't get confusing here. Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Good. Great. So thank you for that question. Thank you for organizing this candidate forum or presentation. It's really great to see you all. Thank you also for hosting that great event last fall. Such a beautiful area. I'm always really happy to be there. So my background, as John shared, is in public health and specifically working with rural and tribal communities in Montana, across the US and around the world. And I'm really proud of the fact that Montana has secured Medicaid expansion. It's made a huge difference in our state. Coverage was extended to 10% or almost 100,000 new Montanans with that Medicaid expansion. So, and we haven't lost a single rural hospital because of it. Despite that, about 25 to 28% of Montana adults are still foregoing a medical treatment or a prescription because they can't cover the costs. And as we all know, rising prices of housing, inflation, and just about everything else right now is just increasing the burden on our Montana families. So I would do everything I can at the federal level to make sure that that Medicaid expansion is still available, and work with partners on the ground to continue to push for it here in Montana, the protection of that. But also, we must absolutely be able to negotiate on prescription drug prices. It would save us almost $80 billion, the US government, over the next 10 years. It doesn't make any sense other than, corrupt corporate interest in, having undue influence on our government. That has not been passed because it's such a no-brainer. And then finally, I believe we need a public option because even with Medicaid expansion and Medicare, there are still working families falling through the cracks. I work with some health workers across Montana, nurses especially, who can't afford health insurance, and they're falling through the cracks. So we need to make sure that every group has the coverage they need.
Okay,
I could talk about health for a couple hours, so that's it.
All right, thank you, Cora. A very different subject. A prolonged Ukrainian war will likely increase threats to national security, contribute to economic problems such as inflation, draw down our military supplies, and aggravate global warming. How do we balance these implications with the need to aid the democratically elected government of Ukraine?
Thank you for that question. I did serve at the State Department under President Obama for 1 year, and was really, really grateful for that experience in international diplomacy. And some of my work has been international. So I'm looking forward to bringing that experience to Washington. Above all, with Ukraine, what's happening is that democracy is in peril, not just in the US, which I believe we all agree on. And that's part of the reason I'm running, is to help protect our democracy, but around the world, across Europe, parts of Africa and South America, we are seeing the rise of totalitarianism across the globe. And it is very, very dangerous. So we have to make sure that we continue to support our NATO allies with the full force of our support, to make sure that Zelensky and the on-the-ground troops there have the support that they need to push back, because Putin's not going to stop with the Ukraine. He didn't stop at Georgia. He didn't stop with Crimea. He wants to reestablish the USSR, and we have to take it really, really seriously. Number one, making sure our allies are really well equipped. Number two, in terms of national security, we do need to expand domestic energy production here, but we need to do it in a way that's responsible to the planet and to future generations. I have teenagers, and one of their number one, if not their number one concern, is the future of the planet and the changing climate. It is not existential anymore. It's here. We're seeing it with the droughts, the unpredictable weather, the inability for us to even track how much extreme weather is happening across this country, which is really telling. And so we need to quickly invest. This is a place where I agree with Ryan Zinke that we need to increase domestic energy production, but it's the how that's very different. I believe and am committed to making sure that it's renewable, and that we're doing it in a way that's very responsible, and we absolutely can. So those are two things I think we need to address: protecting democracy in this country, so that we can continue to fight these forces around the world, and investing in domestic energy so that we're not dependent on places like Russia.
Thank you. Our third question, for the Western District, what are the major takeaways from the 2020 US Census, and how will those findings inform your work as a member of Congress?
Yeah, well, I think we all feel this as well. There's a huge in-migration to our state, and they are choosing Western Montana, although the growth is happening everywhere. I'm hearing about it from, colleagues and across the state, including in Billings and across Eastern Montana. Housing prices are, a main pain point for all of our communities across the state. But what we're seeing is rapid growth, and it's going to continue to grow. I think the pressures of climate change are also going to bring climate refugees to Montana from around the country and on the coasts. And so what we need to make sure we address quickly at the federal and state level is investments in housing. So we need investments in housing and increasing housing stock as quickly as possible. That's my key takeaway, not just from the census, but from what we're seeing in our communities and hearing across the district. And I don't know if you want me to get into my solutions on that front, but that is something, again, I work in healthcare, and we have nurses and technicians sleeping on their friends' couches, leaving the towns that they live in because they can't afford to live here anymore. It's the same with firefighters and first responders. I'm really proud to share that I just last week got the Anaconda firefighter endorsement for Local 100 there. I work closely with first responders, including firefighters across the state. And we need to make sure that they are really well equipped to not only keep our communities safe, but not just for the pandemic and health concerns, but things like forest fires and fires that we're actually seeing, not just wildfires, but also in towns. So making sure we have the housing we need to balance out or respond to this growth. Extreme growth.
Extreme growth. Somewhat related question. Allows you the opportunity to talk about solutions. What are the major economic problems facing the Western District? And what can you, as 1 out of 435 House members, do to address those issues?
Thank you for that question. And that obviously dovetails into what I was just talking about. So number one, absolutely increase housing. That's the main pain point that I hear about across the district. And there are multiple solutions at the federal level. The federal government is a really, really key partner in addressing housing issues. So making sure that the USDA Rural Development Program, which has housing programs in it, especially for first-time home buyers, which a lot of young Montanans I talk to them all the time around the district, they came home or they've started a family and they've been saving up to buy a house, and almost overnight they suddenly can't afford a home in their own hometown. So USDA rural housing, making sure that the Federal Housing Authority is fully funded, and then working with the private sector, because there is a huge amount of money, which is why we're seeing what we're seeing in real estate. But there's a way there's a portion of this funding is available for socially responsible investment, which is things like affordable housing, things that are not, housing that's not going to get flipped. And that's going to be developed in a way that creates community and isn't just high rises, with segregation in a sense. So unlocking those funds, and the federal government is a good partner on that. So housing is a big one. And then in terms of recruiting and retaining health workers, firefighters, educators, the people who are at the heart of our communities. And I was raised by a union carpenter, and my mom studied nursing for a while. So, I work in public health. So these are the people who keep our communities together. We need to look at debt forgiveness for public service employees and people who are serving our communities, like teachers and health workers. And then make sure that they have the housing assistance that they need so that they can afford to live here. I'm really concerned with what's happening, how the fabric of our communities is disintegrating. If any of you saw my Little Blue House ad, that house where it was filmed is one of my hometown neighborhoods. The woman who lives there now, she still has my mom's curtains hanging in the window, and our kids go to school together. She said that only about a quarter of the houses in that neighborhood actually have people living in them full time. So you just imagine raising a kid in a neighborhood where most of the houses are vacant. It doesn't feel safe. So there's so many ways that our communities, the fabric of our communities is disintegrating. And so housing and supporting the people serving us and our public servants, I think is one. And I know I have to stop because I can go into agriculture and the outdoor recreation industry as well if you want.
Let's move on to the fifth question here. If the Democratic Party loses control of the U.S. House, which we're all working hard to prevent, what issues would you focus on and what strategies would you use to achieve a successful 2-year term? And I think we're interested in the processes and strategies you would use to be effective.
Yeah, so one thing that I am really proud of, and part of any of you who work in nonprofits or in direct service to communities understand, is the importance of being able to build consensus. And that is something that I have had to do throughout my career. I've broken down some stalemates between groups that hadn't talked to each other in decades, just to move forward on the agenda of making sure that there was healthcare available to and care available to their communities. So I see the ability to build trust and relationships as actually something that is very often disregarded. It's seen as soft. But I think all of us who work with communities and trying to create change know that that is absolutely central to creating change in a place with, like you said, 435 members. So I would immediately reach out. I already have good relationships with a few members of the House, like Sharice Davids, who's the leader, one of the representatives in Kansas, and some other representatives in rural states with facing similar challenges to Montana, and will really move forward on things like making sure that rural access to healthcare in rural communities continues to be protected and funded. Really look forward to partnering with Senator Tester on so many of the bills that he's moving forward. My sister worked with beginning farmer and ranchers across Montana. I don't know if any of you are familiar with FarmLink or Arrow or CFAP. But we have a good network and relationship with farmers across the state. And so making sure that we are bringing them to the table to help develop legislation. And so making sure, looking at healthcare, and then of course on housing. I think that Montana's not the only state facing those challenges. So looking at other states, I know, for example, that Senator Bennett and Senator Tester have, you have these conversations across states that have similar struggles, and you come up with legislation together and introduce it.
Okay, thank you. The last question. Naturally, we as Democrats want you to represent democratic values in Congress, but the extreme polarization has curtailed getting much done. How can listening to your varied constituents and the voices in Congress happen while staying true to your democratic core?
So again, going back to the work that I've done throughout my career. So I've always been a Democrat, but I've worked with Democrats and Republicans throughout my career, and have also Republicans, Libertarians, and every background in my family. So I'm very comfortable having those difficult conversations, and they are necessary. I think that is, again, one conversation at a time, and so the way that I build consensus is that you just have a conversation. You begin, on the issue that you want to address. And then you just keep working your way downwards, layer by layer, until you find a place where you agree. For example, during COVID relief, and I distributed COVID aid across the state over the last 2 years, and I'm still doing public health response work across the state. But some of my most important allies were Republican county commissioners. And for them to put their name on public health at a time when it was the most divisive, most polarizing topic, I hope speaks to my ability to find common ground, even in the most difficult of circumstances. And so it is. And I also just think, being from Montana, I think the reason I've been successful in, working across the aisle, so to speak, is because I grew up here and we just never talked about politics. I don't know if any of you know Bozeman that well, but it is historically a really conservative town. I never knew that growing up. We didn't talk about it. And so I think that's why I've had a lot of the success I have in my career working across groups, is because of the way I was raised here. And what I learned growing up here, it's about what you say, it's about what you do, not what you say. And so I hope to be able to bring that as much as we can. And I find that when I'm out, across talking to people across the district, I talk to everyone. I get out at every stop and go into every store and, find ways to connect with people who may very well not necessarily vote for me, but I end up there are very few exceptions where I wasn't able to have a good, productive conversation, even in this climate.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes, Cora. May I suggest we take about 4 minutes of questions from visitors? viewers and then maybe leave you a minute to wrap up.
Sounds
So
good.
any questions from our viewers? Mindy?
So this is Mindy Farrell. And my question is, what two committees would you prioritize in the House and why?
So I would work on the Commerce Committee, which actually includes Labor and Health, because of my background in health and the importance of focusing on making sure that rural communities don't get dropped out of the conversation. Many of you know my story. The reason I got into public health is because we lost my dad in a lumber mill accident. And he may have lived if we'd been closer to good care. So I'm very committed to making sure that just because you live in a rural community doesn't mean you should have lower quality of care. So that would be one committee. And then another would be small business. Montana is powered by small businesses. 95% of our businesses are considered small. And I want to make sure that the growth in Montana benefits Montanans. Right? I mean, this place is growing really fast. So our Montana businesses should be at the table. Just like, I don't know if you know, but again, my stepdad was a union carpenter, and I have a lot of union support. If you look at I welcome you to look at my website endorsement page. But the unions, I mean, we have this infrastructure money coming in. We need to make sure our unions and our Montana businesses are at the table getting as much of right of first refusal as possible, right? Being able to really benefit from those contracts and the growth that's happening here in Montana. So healthcare and the economy, and then I certainly would like to work on agriculture as well. And we do have the farm bills coming up. It's going to be renewed, and food security is on the line with climate change and things like the war in Ukraine. We have to really make sure that our family farms here thrive, because they're going to be the key to our future on the healthcare and nutrition front.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Cora, my question would be, what have been some of the biggest surprises that you've encountered being out on the campaign trail?
Biggest surprises, I think that, I mean, I launched in July, so it's been a while, and we've been experiencing change and growth even over that time. But I have been struck by how it doesn't matter how small a community is, housing is a problem. Like people are coming in and buying land and property and buildings and houses up across. It doesn't matter how small the town is. So people really during COVID just went online and started buying our land and our houses. And so that was a big awakening, really early on. And I think it's important. People always think it's just Bozeman and Missoula and Kalispell. It's Deer Lodge, it's Anaconda, it's Virginia City. It's, I'm sure you guys are feeling it there too. So that's been a big one. And then the other thing that I guess I just want to share is that I have had some negative attacks by my Democratic opponents, and that has been unfortunate. I have committed to running a campaign that has very high integrity and very positive, because I think that in our history in Montana right now, Democrats really need to pull together. So that's been surprising. I didn't expect that. So it's unfortunate.
Other questions? I do have another question. In Sanders County, I think we've been discouraged late summer, early fall with the number of wildfires and the smoke that inhibits tourism. You spent time in New Mexico. There's a huge major fire down there. That was a controlled burn that got out of hand. What lessons or what needs to be done with the Forest Service, or what are the implications are suggested by these developments?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And my dad was a logger, and my family on that side has a history in timber and lumber. And so I've actually met with Mark Finney. Does anyone know who that is? He runs the fire lab in Missoula. So I've been meeting with like our top scientists in the state, as well as our firefighters, and learning a lot about fire, which has been really fascinating. And I encourage everyone to go visit that fire center in Missoula. It's like the best in the world. So we have the expertise. It does have to be a combination of, my understanding is, of controlled burns, selective logging, And then making sure that our fire departments are really, really, really well equipped and well staffed. And that's a major challenge. I mean, most of our fire departments right now aren't fully staffed. So that's really dangerous. So I think that, there's still room for timber harvesting in your area and across, obviously mostly Western Montana. It has to be responsible. And then that's the fear with prescribed burn, is that it can get out of hand. So just making sure you have the absolute best plan in place. I do think, again, speaking of being able to work in a bipartisan manner, I do think the bill that Steve Daines introduced on fire management there's some really good parts to it. So I would look right away to the existing legislation and see what we might be able to propose and move through.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but Cora, we appreciate your time with us this afternoon and your visit to our area, and we look forward to seeing you here again, and best luck on the campaign trail. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
So I think that concludes our
much.
forum. Mindy, do you have anything that you'd like to?
I just want to say that I want to thank all three candidates for being here today. And this recording will be available on our website, sanderscountydemocrats.org. And please stay active, stay involved. And thank you all so much for taking time out of your Sunday afternoon.
Okay, see you all.
Bye now.